like we're not trained to feel our feelings. Even in childhood, it's like, oh, were you scared? Well, you're okay. It's okay now. Like the objective is to get the kid to stop being scared as fast as possible. And when we don't learn to like sit with the feelings and fully feel them and like integrate them, because they don't stick around long if you give them the attention and the space to exit your body. Hooray! Okay. Today on the Neurodivergent Creative Podcast, we have special guest. It's Dylan King, and we didn't prepare any type of bio or introduction, so I'm just going to turn it over to Dylan and say, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Dylan King. I'm a trauma-informed spiritual coach. I focus on utilizing creative writing to help fellow neurodivergent folks do their best at unmasking. So I do a lot of workshops, one-on-one coaching, workbooks, all of that good stuff, so you can kind of delve into that coveted, authentic self that people are always talking about.
Love it. Okay. I have taken a couple of Dylan's creative writing like email courses and love them. There was one on like blackout poetry, and there was one on like embracing your like inner emo kid. And like it was a very like pop punk playlist kind of thing. I really love the way that you like take poetry and make it shadow work, or like take like your cringe high school, middle school interest and make it shadow work. I love it. So what we were going to talk about today is just a little autistic journey, but specifically talking about like the empath or a highly sensitive person to autism pipeline.
Yeah, so the empath or the highly sensitive person, which is a little bit more, I don't know, scientific version of the empath, because you do see that sometimes referenced, both of them actually, in like Psychology Today and things like that. Will write articles about them. And of course, when you get into self-help work or spiritual work, those are words that get brought up a lot. Empath, definitely. Then the longer you do it, you may come across phrases like highly sensitive person. And I definitely have this very vivid memory of being super frustrated and being in a conversation with somebody talking about how I could not have a conversation with my partner because every time that he was upset, I was like, oh, I'm such an empath. I'm just absorbing all of his emotions, and it's so hard for me. And they stopped me in my tracks and said, there is no such thing as an empath. So just stop everything that you're saying. And you're not absorbing his emotions. This is not a thing. And I was like, okay. So I was like, okay, I have to reconsider some of the things that I've been thinking about myself. I've got to reframe the conversations that I'm having instead of just saying like, don't talk to me like that. I'm an empath, blah, 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 because it's very easy to just kind of put that on as like a shield, like an excuse.
Yeah, like a defense mechanism.
Yeah, if you can use it, and not everybody does this, and we can sit here all day and do a bunch of whataboutisms. Well, not everybody does that, but it can be very easy to fall into this trap of, oh, well, I'm just so sensitive. So it can become this trap. And it definitely did for me, where I was like, well, I am very sensitive to the way that things feel and the energies and the this and the that. Instead of finding ways to cope with it, I was just saying, well, this is just who I am, and everybody else should accommodate to me.
Yeah. Well, it's like until you learn that this is kind of like a function of your neurodivergence, like a function of your brain's operating system. Like your brain has an operating system that makes you highly sensitive, and also trauma can come in and make you like hyper vigilant and very, very sensitive to changes in people's moods, because that gave you safety information,
Mm-hmm.
like in a traumatic setting. And until you understand that, you just think that like, well, I'm broken in this particular way. So like, please do not disturb the soft bunny that is me. And I'm very much the same. Like I've always been very sensitive, very empathetic. And now I kind of understand like, okay, well, that was like too much for me. And now I need to go write a poem or write in my journal or talk it out or something. But it's almost kind of helpful to me that other people aren't so burdened by sensitivities and empathy, because then I can be like, okay, so I like this about myself. I like that I'm soft and that I can feel things and I can put myself in other people's shoes. But like, then sometimes I also get mad about it. And I'm like, well, I have anxiety and I'm constantly taking these empathetic, highly sensitive other people's shoes on and then like sending myself into lovely little panic attacks about it. So it's like, okay, all right. It's good to know that I'm mentally ill. It's good to know that like it's so hard. And it's especially hard in like this week. So we are recording this during election week, and I've been dissociating for a good 3 days straight. And Donald Trump has been elected president. And like, I can understand intellectually that like white supremacy has affected voter turnout. And like, I get it intellectually as a person who has read history books and has previously wondered like, how did these atrocities happen? And now I am like, oh, just like that. Just your neighbor just went and voted for that guy. But like my empathetic heart soft bunny portion of me is like, I don't understand how anybody could listen to him talk and think he's the right choice. And so I'm kind of like, that's where I am. Like if I think too much about like all the harm that he's going to do, I just completely shut down. So it's been a weird week over here.
You're right. Like the things that you are able to see and you start to wonder like, am I crazy? And I am the sort of person who tries really hard to understand. So I will ask incessant questions of people to say, I cannot understand why you would believe this. Explain to me why you think that this is the truth. Tell me why you think this. Explain it to me. And I will ask them over and over again to the point of being very annoying to try and see where they are coming from, because I just really don't believe that people are that bad.
And I think that they're scared and
they're scared,
like
and
the right wing has created the fear. They're literally saying, well, there's trans people in your kid's school and they're going to force your kids to transition. That is laughably untrue.
It's so, the things that I have heard from like asking, and this is the thing also that I think we have to take some accountability for, because I do also know people who just will get mad and they won't ask those questions. When you do ask those questions, then you hear those fears and you get to say, okay, but why? Why do you think that? And where are those fears coming from? Some of the things that I have heard are so strange and so unfounded, and you still have to come at it with curiosity.
And that's hard.
It's
because I just
so
want
hard.
to shake people.
Oh yeah. No, I had some conversations where I was like, I can't put my hands on this person. That's not a thing to do. You don't put your hands on people. But I'm going to, it's like, no, you're going to listen to me. And I'm going to continue to ask these questions. And I'm going to then give you the correct information until we get to the bottom of this. And I'll stay in this conversation as long as I can. And then when I can't anymore, I'll leave. I'll leave the conversation.
Yeah. I've cut off so much of my family. There is no one I am in contact with in my family that like voted for Trump. I'm 99% sure. But I did see like some screenshots of cousins who have long deleted and or blocked me, like celebrating the Trump win and saying God is good. And I'm like, okay, like they've cut me off because I'm a wacky leftist. But like, how much responsibility do I have to like go dig up these dead connections with people and be like, hey, just so you know, Trump is evil. Like, I didn't even know that this was going on until like, the screenshots were coming in. And I think a lot of people, especially queer people, especially neurodivergent people, we are more likely to have like moved away from toxic families of origin and created found families.
Yeah.
That, like, in my circle, there are no Trump supporters.
Right.
So my view of like the average perception, very skewed because I'm not going out and inviting those conversations with people. And like, that sucks. Like, I can't believe that I was like surprised a little, because I figured that the Harris campaign, like, they were not catering to me over on the left. They were doing this thing where they courted the moderates. And I was like, well, they must know what they're doing. They must know that they're going to get the moderate vote. And people simply just stayed home because they didn't care to vote for a Black woman. And so I'm like, oh, okay. Which goes back to the intellectually. I see how this happened because we live in a racist patriarchy.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm just going to like keep saying the same thing and talking in circles. Like, I just don't understand how anybody could like look at anything he stands for and be like, this is morally correct. Because he has flat out said, like, vote for me and you'll never have to vote again. Like, he's going to try and dismantle the democratic system. And people are like, woohoo, because we hate queers. And I don't understand the level of like throwing yourself under the bus and not realizing that you have voted for that bus to run you over. Like,
I think a lot of it for me comes down to the types of questions that I have seen come up is in the conversations that I have had are like, well, I don't understand why it's really so bad if Roe v. Wade got overturned. I don't really understand why that was so bad. I don't really understand why we need to protect trans people if they're not doing anything wrong. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay. And those are such big, huge conversations that you can tell people who have not been asking questions, because those are, years and years ago, I was unfamiliar with the trans community. I had to learn about what it meant to be trans. Like, I had to do work. It has been work.
Seek knowledge.
To learn. So I cannot explain to you in a minute what, like, I can try to give a pretty succinct and good explanation of these incredibly complex issues. But these are people. And when you will not put the empathy into the people, like, I can understand, like, okay, so you don't logically see why it matters. Well, I can tell you why you don't think it matters. You don't think it matters because it doesn't affect you.
Right.
That's why you don't think it matters.
Right. And that part lacks empathy in a way that I don't understand.
That is so hard to understand. And it is really, really baffling. I think for many people, especially neurodivergent people, who one of the first things that happened to me that morning was, and this is something that I have started to understand as I realized that I was autistic, and it was able to reframe a lot of my life for me, is that meltdowns feel like my skin getting really, really upset. That's the best way that I can describe it. Like, my skin hurts. And so that morning I was like, my skin hurts and I have to start doing something to calm my skin down, because we're going to be in a bad spot if I don't start managing this, because my skin hurts.
Yeah.
And then I also noticed that yesterday my body started to hurt. So sometimes I have like hip pain and knee pain. And then yesterday I was getting ready to take my girls to soccer practice. And I was like, oh my God, I can barely walk. Like, I cannot go to soccer practice. I can't walk. And so those physical manifestations of the way that it was coming alive in my body, I was like, okay, this is not like just, I don't know, tripped and fell down or something
Yeah, it's
Like
not
this is
like,
the emotions coming and living in my body.
yeah.
And I have to process them or it's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. So on Wednesday, I hosted, like, I just sent out an invitation, like, to my email list and on my Facebook. And I was like, just come, like, sit in space and we're going to talk and feel our feelings. And, we just started sort of sharing and talking and, like, our thoughts and our feelings and our reactions to the election news. And then it very quickly kind of turned into, like, a rant about the politics of it and about this and that. And I had to be like, hey, we're here to feel our feelings. And I think so many of us, like, especially neurodivergent people, not even especially, I'm going to say like every single frickin' person, like, we're not trained to feel our feelings. Even in childhood, it's like, oh, were you scared? Well, you're okay. It's okay now. Like, the objective is to get the kid to stop being scared as fast as possible. And when we don't learn to, like, sit with the feelings and fully feel them and, like, integrate them, because they don't stick around long if you give them the attention and the space to exit your body. We intellectualize them. We look for reasons to explain why the bad thing happened, as opposed to just sitting with the feelings about the bad thing. And that, like, that's something that I want to, like, make sure that people are doing. Like, do something to engage with the emotion. Don't just cover it up. Like, I started working on a new art piece because I was like, I want to do something with my hands. I want to make something, because I had been just dissociating into a video game. And I'm like, I don't want to play the video game that is always there and always consistent and always the same. I want to do something tangible with all of these, like, emotions that I'm having, because there's a lot of grief, right? There's grief in the fact that we have no idea what's coming next. There's grief in the fact that I didn't want to vote for Harris and I made myself do it anyway, and it still didn't even matter. Like, I got a lot of feelings. And, like, going back to the empath thing, when we just sort of say, well, I'm an empath, so I feel everybody's feelings. It's like, you don't even feel yours. Because we're not sitting around feeling our feelings. You are sensing the other person's feelings, and that is making you feel unsafe.
Yeah.
That's the feeling that you're having right now, is unsafe. It's not your partner's anger or your mom's judgment or, like, whatever. Because if you were absorbing those feelings, you'd be judgy and angry too. Mm-hmm. You're scared. And a lot of us are scared right now. And, like, the empath thing coming from, like, the hypervigilance of living with an abuser, because you'll see articles that's like the narcissist and the empath.
Yeah.
Like, that's the archetype.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, a narcissist needs an empath. And I'm like, you're not helping anybody with that in particular. Thanks. Like, you're making victims and survivors feel like they have some weird superpower that they didn't ask for. And it's like, I love a sci-fi empath, right? I love somebody who's like, oh, I can tell that you're sad, even though you're acting happy. Like,
yeah.
But we as humans don't have that. I try not to just say narcissist when I mean abuser.
Right?
It's like, there's a diagnosable personality disorder. Yes. That's a mental illness that is narcissism. And, like, I'm not qualified to diagnose people. And I'm trying. I'm not perfect. And also, like, for some people, like, that's the language that they have when they are, like, unpacking the abuse and the trauma that they have lived through. Like, that's what the articles are going to say. So I don't, like, while I am trying to decrease using that to me, like, blanket mean abuser, I don't fault people for saying it because it's so, like, common in the lexicon. But, hey, anybody listening, consider this a reminder. If you mean abuser, you can just say abuser. You don't have to say narcissist, because you don't know if those people have narcissistic personality disorder. And also, I'm sure there's some people out there who do have NPD who are working very hard on it. So, like, look at me being highly sensitive.
I think it's just, so many of the neurodivergent people that I talk to, their special interest a lot of the time tends to be themselves, and not in a narcissistic way, but just that they have, or other people. So they have read a lot of self-help books. They have read so much, dove really deep into the literature. So when you read things like the empath survival guide or a guide to being a highly sensitive person. All of those books, when you read them for the first time and you have no like frame of reference, you're like, this is world changing.
Right.
I've
I
never
feel
seen, I feel so seen. This is everything to me. And then you go back, because I've gone back and reread them now, because they're written by women decades before it was, it's difficult to get diagnosed with autism as a woman now. They're talking about living with autism or
yeah.
living as an autistic woman,
Yes.
but they couldn't get that. They're
Yeah.
describing it. And whether they just didn't know how to articulate it because they couldn't get diagnosed, or they didn't want to be diagnosed because they were resistant to it, or because there could be a lot of factors. That's what they're
Yeah.
describing.
It's so like interesting to read things. Like I will notice, because sometimes I go and I'm like, I want to look up quotes about first drafts or quotes about revision for books, right? Because I want to share 10 authors' thoughts on the revision process or something. Because I think it's helpful to see the greats talking about their process. And sometimes some of these methods, I'm like, you're autistic. That's autistic. That is an autistic way to talk about your process for writing. It's so funny because like I used to be one of those people that was like, well, we didn't used to have autism and now suddenly there's autism everywhere. And I am sorry to the past for that take, but also now I'm here. So obviously we learned along the way, but we just go through like generation after generation after generation of finding new ways to talk about what autism feels like and like the experiences of living with autism and like the autistic operating system of the brain.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful and wonderful. And yes, it means that more people are self-diagnosing or going out and seeking a diagnosis in their adulthood. But that doesn't mean that like, oh, suddenly everybody is autistic. It means that like we finally have the language, and in the age of the internet, like there's finally such a volume of human experience that we can sort of look at and try on because we have empathy, that we kind of realize things about ourselves that 100 years ago we might never have because we were never put in the context of having language to talk about it.
Yeah. Have you ever seen, I've only ever seen it as a screenshot. I'm pretty sure it's a Tumblr post where it's talking about how there is a theory that like the old lore fairy children
And changelings.
and changelings stems from autistic children. Have you seen that?
Yep, I sure have.
I love that. And it comforted me so much when my first child was diagnosed with autism. It was just so lovely to envision her as a little fairy child. And I still love it to think of her that way. And I was at a church gathering the other day, and there are two women who go to my church who are from England. And one of them came up to me and she asked me if I was familiar with some book. And I said, no, I don't know. Don't know that, because she's older than me and she's from England. And so she pulled it up on her phone, and it was some, older British children's book that was just tons and tons of illustrations of fairy lore. And she said, when I see your girls, they remind me of these fairies. And it just made my heart swell that just, she had no knowledge of that other story. She just is this lovely woman who adores my children and watches them from afar. And she wanted to tell me about these fairy stories from her childhood and how when she sees my kids, they remind her of fairies.
That's so sweet.
It was so sweet.
And very affirming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's so sweet.
It was so.
I'm having emotions.
I know there's a lot of very valid criticism towards the church, but there are so many wonderful people where I go who love my children so much. It's so wonderful to go there and see them loved by those people.
Yeah, good. Like we need community.
Yeah.
And a lot of people find great community in church, and it's hit or miss.
Yeah, some of them miss real big, and
Yeah.
I understand that, and it's caused a lot of trauma for a lot of people, and I think that's incredibly valid. And there are definitely people, places, and people in the same city that I live in, and I'm very lucky that I have a community that loves on them.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that's what community should be. That's what it means. Like it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to do everything. We used to have the villages, and
Yeah,
now we don't have the villages as much. You have to be very intentional about the village. It's nice that
you
the
have
village used to
to
just come
work
standard.
to create your village, which
Yeah.
is
Exhausting.
exhausting. And I can see myself on both sides, I think, where I struggle to ask people for help and I struggle to create those communities and be a part of them. But at the same time, I'm like, well, it should, right? Like
Yeah.
it
It
should,
should. It should just be there.
it should.
I want to wrap us up. And I feel like we talked about a lot of things, and also basically one thing, which is that being sensitive isn't bad, isn't wrong. Like, doesn't, like, your differences, your empathy. Like, man, people really shit on being sensitive. They're like, oh, you're just so sensitive. Like, yeah, and that's great. And that makes my connections better. And I don't know. I hate that the world doesn't want us to be sensitive and wants everybody to just be rugged and individualistic and every man for himself. But that's not how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
And in fact has led us back to fascism. So love that for us. I don't know. Any parting thoughts? Any hope? Maybe we can end on a nice note.
I think you made a really wonderful, wonderful note when you were talking about doing things with your hands. The more that because art is very vulnerable, it's a way to process is part of why the work that I do is primarily through getting your journal out and writing poetry or writing fan fiction or what have you, because that's such a powerful way to process things. It is so easy to get all up in your head and intellectualize and overthink and stay up here. Everyone listening is so smart and so capable and can think this through and overanalyze and do all of that. And that's a piece of it, but it's not all of it. And so I would say getting out that journal, getting out your paintbrush, what have you, and
Yeah.
letting yourself do those things so that
And
whatever those next steps are don't come from a place of tunnel vision and nothingness.
yeah. Yeah. And my advice on the art is like don't go in with a plan. Don't be like, "Oh, I'm going to make art that says this." Like, no, you just start making blobs. Just start making shapes. Just start writing words. Do not try to intellectualize this emotional process. So, like yesterday, I put something on a canvas and then I started just building around it, and I have no idea what it's going to be, but while I was just making it, doing random stuff, I got to have thoughts about it, and I got to like really think through things that I like hadn't realized were on my mind. That is what we get out of just journaling off the top of your head. That is what we get out of like the process of art.
Yes.
And like
Bad art.
make bad
Make
art.
bad art. Make
That is your
spelling
homework.
mistakes.
Bad art, make it. Be messy. Make a mess. Let your emotions make the art, and your emotions are a mess, and so your art can be a mess, and that is fine. But while we're here talking about empathy and sensitivity and all of this, like, yeah, feel your feelings and turn it into some act of creation. That is a very, very tiny step that you can take right now to actually process everything that you're feeling. Beautiful. Well, thank you, Dylan, for hanging out and talking about empathy and letting your dog bite your arm. I love it. Where can we find you around the internet?
So I'm on Threads, Instagram, TikTok. My handle is Queen of Grit all over the place. And that is also my website, queenofgrit.com, where you'll find blogs and workbooks, coaching, all of that good stuff.
Yes, I love it. I highly recommend the blog. It has been very good. I know that that's new for you and that you've been nervous, but you are nailing it.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and end our recording there. Everybody, I will see you again in roughly 2 weeks-ish. We're doing 2 podcasts a month right now to sort of conserve energy and funds. Please support me in the podcast on Patreon so we can get back up to 4 a month. That's my dream. And I love you and you can't stop me.
Approach and tell you a joke to lighten your load and help you along or sing you a song. Do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do.